Yeah, so it is week 10, the last week of lectures. Hooray, yeah. Quarter's almost done. You excited about spring break? Yeah? Now, unlike you guys, I don't have any other classes except for this one. So when I get here, I'm gone. So I get a 2-week spring break, unlike you chumps who have final exams. So I'll be enjoying that. What we're doing here in this class right now is I am going to give lectures these last 2 days, today and Thursday. I know that it's hard to be very motivated about that because usually you want to go to the lecture if you need to know it for the homework or the final or something like that, I guess. And the last homework assignment went up the other day, and it doesn't require any of the material from this week. You can solve it using services and user logins and stuff that we covered in the past. So I'll talk about that assignment in a second, but in terms of why should you care this week, I guess I would just say that I have a couple topics that I want to talk about that I think are kind of interesting or you might find useful in your future if you want to develop later apps, even if you don't use it on the homework. Today in particular, I'm going to end class a little bit early. Usually we go till about 2:50, right? I think I'm going to end more like 2:30 or 2:20, depends how long it takes. Because I have to go to another meeting after this, so I'm going to probably end slightly early. But so today I'm going to talk about maps and location-based services and apps. And on Thursday, I hope you'll show up for that one. I want to talk about something kind of cool, which is like a completely different way of writing apps. It's called React Native, and it's like, I may have briefly mentioned it before, it's a way that you can write one base of code that can be used to generate an Android app and an iPhone app, or even a web app or a desktop app, all different kinds of apps from the same base of code. Very neat idea. And it's very different than what we've been doing because you write your code in a more general way. But that's what I want to show you a little bit about. I can't teach you that in great detail in one talk, but I can kind of show you what that's like and get you some basics about it in case you want to learn more about it. I will also talk a little bit about what if you really write an app? How do you put it in the app store or sell it or something like that, and just sort of give you a few other tips and kind of wrap things up. So that's what I'll do on Thursday's lecture, and that'll be the last one. They're starting to, as the quarter's starting to wind down, they're starting to ask students to evaluate the courses and stuff. And of course, I always want to read your feedback about the course and things like that. I might send you out a survey link for some supplemental feedback. I still want to see what you have to say on the university feedback forums and stuff about the class, but I also might want to ask you some things like what are some Android topics you wish we had covered or something like that. So keep an eye open for that. Now, in terms of homework 7, I sent you guys saw an email that I sent about homework 7 being out, right? So that is due in the middle of next week. I think it's due Thursday. And if you want to use a late date on that, you can. So that would be kind of near the end of the finals week. The assignment, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about it, but I just wanted to take a minute in case we have questions. It's called Tree Chat, and I want you to write sort of a very, very stripped down, very basic channel-based chatting program. Think like a really bad version of Slack, where you log in and you can join a room or a channel, and then there's other people in the room, and you can send messages to the room, and then everybody in the room will see the message. So I want you to have 3 or 4 different activities. I want you to have kind of a welcome screen, and I want you to allow people to either create accounts or log in with an existing account. And then once they've logged in, I want you to show them a list of rooms, and then they pick a room, and then when they're in the room, they can see the messages that have been sent to the room. You can have a little bit of flexibility. I think, this is the closest we're doing to writing like a real app in this class. A lot of the apps we've written have been sort of 1 or 2 activities. Friender was also sort of kind of close to being a real app, but this one almost is a real thing. But I want to make sure that you don't get lost in all the possible complexity here, because really making this work perfectly can be a lot of work. So there's a couple things in the spec we talk about that you could kind of cut corners on, or might be optional or something like that. But I do want you to have this kind of general functionality of different users logging in and sending messages to a room. Another thing is, we talked about services and notifications and stuff, and so I want it to be the case that if the user is in this app and then they exit the app and they go back to the welcome screen of the Android device or whatever, and a message comes into the channel, I'd like you to show a notification to them. So make a service that watches for those messages. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and in terms of how do you build this or how do you get started on this? Well, The stuff with the users and the login, I don't expect you to write a ton of logic for that. I mean, I showed a little bit last Thursday, some starting points for doing logins. I mean, if you want to, you can just completely farm out your user account and login aspect of your project to one of those third-party services like Google Sign-In. I mean, if you want the sort of minimum lines of code solution here while still having it work, I would do that. If you want a few more lines of code, you could use a Firebase authentication solution where you have to still show a UI like that, but Firebase can kind of manage the list of accounts. So take a look at the slides from last Thursday on how to get started. A lot of that code I think you can adapt from those slides. And if you're having trouble getting it to work, or if you don't want to start on that part of the project, you could just sort of assume the user's name and credential or something like that, and then just forward them along to the next part and maybe skip the actual authentication until later if you want. You don't have to get blocked on stuff. I want to emphasize that. And then in terms of like, how do I keep track of a list of channels and all these messages and stuff like that? Well, I mean, it's a real app. You're going to have different devices that all want to be able to see this information, so it's probably on a server somewhere. We talked about different ways of storing data, right? We talked about you could do local SQL databases, you can do web services, or you could do Firebase. Those are 3 ways that I taught you, right? And I hope you understand that not all those ways are equally good here. Like a local SQL database isn't going to work very well because that's going to be on one person's phone and not on the other person's phone, right? You need it to be some sort of shared data source that they're talking to. A web service, like you talk to with Ion or something, that would be fine, except you have to have a web server and you have to set up a web service, and you probably don't. So, I mean, you're basically left with likely to use Firebase. So now if you used Firebase on the Animal game, you'd say, okay, I used that before, I know how to do it. If you pick one of the other ways of storing data before, well, now you get to learn Firebase, you get to try it out. You're not required to use Firebase, but I think it's a pretty good fit for this because, it's pretty easy to store a set of things in Firebase and then go fetch it and look at it and display it like this, But in terms of something like this, where there's messages, that's also probably data stored in the Firebase JSON data storage. But like, as the new messages come in, you want this device to notice and redraw the thing to show the new messages, right? And Firebase is actually really good for that because you can use these sort of value event listeners that we showed you. A value event listener will send an event to your phone when the value changes of something. Or you can do what's called a child listener. So if you have a channel object and there are little children inside of that channel object, it will inform you if there's a new child. Like if the children are messages, it'll tell you when there's a new message, basically. So Firebase, actually, I forget if I told you this, but Firebase, the library, was originally built by a startup that was making a product called FireChat. And they built it and they decided, we need some sort of big data storage for the chatting software that we're writing. And they wrote it and they were like, this is kind of a useful little abstraction. We might want to use this for other kinds of apps. And so they abstracted out their sort of database from FireChat and they called it Firebase. And then FireChat got bought by Google, and then Google said, we kind of just wanted your cool technology and your engineers, and they chucked the FireChat app and they got rid of it, but they kept the Firebase and they turned it into a library, and so Firebase was built for a chatting program, so it ought to work for this stupid thing, is my point. And anyway, a lot of the way Firebase naturally works is tailored to an app like this that's going to have periodic updates of little chats, little messages, new information that comes in that you want to refresh on the screen or something like that. I don't care too much if it's beautiful looking. This is just a dumb text view that I'm just appending strings to. I wrote up kind of a rough solution myself so I could show you some screenshots and kind of make sure that this thing didn't take me 60 hours to write myself or something, But I would certainly say that I recommend for you to use Firebase, although if you have some other way that you think you want to store data on a server that isn't Firebase, I guess that's up to you. But I may or may not be able to help you if it breaks, because I don't know every data source for Android apps. So yeah, that's kind of the plan here. Let me think, what else was I going to say? The spec talks a little bit about some of the data, like how you might choose to store some of this stuff. I provided a few examples of what a message might look like in the data set, like maybe a message has these various variables in it, or a user, or these different things. So what you could imagine would be that like maybe a channel looks like that. It's got a name and a description, and there's people in the channel, an array, and then there's an array of messages that have been sent to the channel, and maybe when somebody sends a message there, you push a new child onto that messages array. and then any phones or services or whatever that are watching that area of the data set are going to be notified the new message was there. This is just a suggestion. One of the things I wanted to do here, I was tempted to give you some zip full of different starting pieces or whatever, and the more I thought about it, I decided, no, I want to give you nothing. Because I kind of want you to feel that you built something from scratch and you actually built some sort of real thing. However, look, let's be real here. If you've done well on all the other assignments, I'm not going to be offended if you don't even turn this in, because I gave you that one assignment that you can drop. So if you've been going to section and turning in the other assignments, you might decide that homework 7 is the one that you want to drop. There was a post on Piazza that was saying, how do I know if I want to drop this or not, because I don't have all my scores back yet, right? And we're working on grading the remaining assignments. We're not going to have your homework 6 scores back for a little while, so you're not going to know all your scores in time to decide this, I don't think. But I guess what I would say is, it is a fairly challenging assignment. If you're turning in solutions to these projects that are pretty complete, then you're probably going to be getting pretty decent scores on them. So I would say if you've done all the other assignments to a satisfying level to yourself, and you have been going to section, I don't think it's super risky to make this be the one that you drop. But you have to decide what's best for you. There was another post on the Piazza about how do I test this, right? That's a little bit tricky, right? Because in theory, you'd want to fire up a bunch of different devices and connect and send messages to the chat channel and stuff, right? But I think someone in the Piazza was like, please tell me I don't have to fire up 3 different emulators. My computer will melt in a fiery blaze or whatever, right? That's probably true. Hey, if you're working in pairs, you could each fire up an emulator. You can also do a lot of faking of things. You can go to the console of Firebase, the web page where you can see the data, and you could just add data from there and see if the device shows it. You know what I mean? Like you can basically just inject data using the little web user interface just to see whether that gets to the clients or not. So there's a lot of different things you can do. I do sympathize. I wanted you guys to do something that involved like services and different stuff, right? And I realized that social or communication apps are kind of hard to test, right? They're harder to test than something like a Snake or Friender where you just run it on your machine. But hey, that's what happens when you write real stuff, right? So anyway, that's kind of what the assignment is. Do you guys have any other questions or comments about it or anything?
Do we have a section this week?
Yes, we do have section. That'll be our last one. And we're going to practice writing a very simple service, because I don't think we've had a section on that yet. And you're going to write an app called Lunch or Get Lunch that it only sends one message, I want lunch. And you can send it to another person, and then you will have lunch with that person. You're required to by law. But you'll practice doing that with service. Yeah, so there will be a section today and tomorrow. Yeah. Well, any other questions or comments about this homework?
It is optional to have channels, or what exactly? I don't get that.
So, as I was posting this, I was trying to scrub off a few of the tricky parts in case I could make it simpler. In general, I want you to have like a list of different channels a person can join. But I decided that if you want to just have there be one global channel that everyone is in, that's okay with me. I think it's less useful of an app. If you imagine a lot of people using this, you're probably going to have different people would want to have different conversations with each other. But I will allow a version that only has one channel if that makes it easier to implement. That's fine. And I guess if you did that, you would not have to display an activity listing them. You would just sort of jump from signing in to something like this. Right? Yeah, sure.
Do you think it would be easier to try to implement it without services first and then throw services in, or would that be like a mistake?
So, the way I implemented my solution was I didn't write the service at first. I just made the app work where I could send messages and I would see messages, and I got it basically working. But then, of course, the moment I jumped out of the app, I wouldn't know if there were any new messages. So then I came back and I added the service, and I made it because I had code that was sort of over here that was like watching for new values to display. And instead I moved that code here to the service, and basically I sort of, when the messages would come in, I would broadcast them out. And then this guy would receive the broadcast and it would still display them, but now it's a little bit of a secondary, middleman. And as well as broadcasting the message out with a broadcast receiver, I would also pop up a notification. Yeah, so you're right. I thought it was easier to write it first without the server and then add the server or change it, refactor it to use the server later. That does mean that you write some code that you basically end up deleting or moving or changing or whatever, but it just, to me, I found it easier to reason about and test that way. Also, I guess theoretically, if you ran out of time or got too busy, you had other finals or something, and you wrote a version that didn't even have a service, you could still turn that in and you would get a pretty decent amount of the points because it would function, it would work, but it would be missing this aspect of the functionality that would lose some amount of points. But at least you'd have like a working app in some sense, right? Were there any other, I thought there were like one or two other comments. Yeah.
What do you, like, when it comes to the channels thing, do you have, like, is it like, as you mentioned in your description, is it like Slack in which you are invited to join a channel, or how does it play?
I could imagine all kinds of different extensions or changes you could make to this, but I wanted it to be really simple where here's a list of all the channels that have ever been created, and if you want to add go into one, go ahead, and you could only be in one channel at a time, I guess. That would be the simplest way to implement it. Like, every user is in a channel. Every channel has a set of users that are in it. And when there's a new message that goes to the channel, all those users will see it. You could also imagine a system where you are in all of the channels, but you just, you can go into different ones, or you can add yourself to one. You could also imagine like a moderator or administrator who grants you permission to add a channel. I think pretty quickly it gets really complicated. So I kind of felt like when I coded this up, I felt like this was enough work, so I stopped. So I thought anything beyond this, I would say you could do that as an extra extension. As I was brainstorming this assignment, I thought of a million different extensions. Like, what if you want to localize it to Spanish or French? Go ahead, I won't require that. What if you want to say, remember me, so you don't have to retype your password extension? What about profile pictures or a little profile avatar extension? This thing has channel messages but doesn't have DMs. You can't send a direct message from one user just to another. I guess you could sort of simulate that by making a channel that only had those two people in it, but nothing's stopping some other jerk from entering the channel. So like if you want to slide into DMs, you can't do that unless you add an extension for that. I thought about saying, well, this is an app, we've talked about landscape and rotating and different layouts and stuff. This app really benefits from that because if you have landscape, you have a wide screen, so it's nice to have the list of who's in the room over on the side, and then the messages on the other side. But I decided not to make you do that except as an extension. There's no like button, there's no emojis, there's all kind of stuff you could imagine doing here, right? Trip is already imagining some way to embed memes in here. I know he is, so you can think about that if you want. But a lot of that stuff I just felt like, okay, extra feature, right? And if you do some of these, I would give you a couple of points, extra points or something if you want. Yeah. Obviously you could draw inspiration from any real social app or network, right? Slack or Twitter or Facebook or some other chat program. Anything else about this one? I would say that there are some points where you could get stuck here. Like you're trying to set Firebase up and it doesn't work for whatever reason. So, it will be more stressful if that is happening to you a week from Wednesday than if that happens to you tomorrow. So maybe start and get it so where you can send a message to Firebase and you connect it to Firebase successfully or something, and then just stop and go study for your other exams. If you could get to there, probably a lot of the rest of the coding you could sort of hack your way through, you know what I mean? But making sure all these little pieces talk to each other would be a good thing to do. That's my advice. Okay, well, having said all that, I do want to teach you about maps and location today. So if you have more questions about this, you know how to ask me. So let's talk about maps. Now, I have to admit, I felt like I should cover this, but I don't actually think this is that cool. I feel like, I sometimes teach the CS 194 class, which is senior project class. So in that class, groups of certain number of students will meet up and they'll come up with project ideas, and then they'll present and pitch what they want to build, and then they'll spend the 10-week quarter building that project, and at the end of the quarter they'll all present these big projects that they have built. And every CS major has to do this senior project requirement, right? And I got to tell you, more and more and more of the groups will do some kind of mobile app, and it's always some map thing where it's like, oh, we'll do Craigslist, but it's got a map and you can see all of the stuff that's for sale, or we'll do some kind of cooking app, but it'll have a map, and it's like, oh no, I'm out of rice. Oh, but they've got rice. I'll walk over there and I'll get some rice. And it always just sort of turns into like a shitty map with like a little bit of a thingy on top of the shitty map. And so I've seen like 100 of those, and I don't think they're that cool. So I may have a little bit of a visceral reaction to mapping as not being as cool as, but I don't know. But like a lot of 19-year-olds seem to think maps are awesome. So I feel like, okay, I have to teach you maps are cool or something. I mean, look, I can make a joke about it, but I do think you can imagine apps that would benefit from something to do with the user's location, or something to do with mapping and moving around in spatial coordinates and stuff. So you can do that in Android. There's like a widget, like a view that displays a map using Google Maps as the data source. It's actually implemented as a fragment. You don't have to, I know if I say the F word, fragments, no, I don't want to deal with fragments. But don't worry, you don't have to like write the fragment. A lot of the icky stuff is when you have to write a fragment. This is an existing one. You just have to like use it. It's not that bad. Separately, like you can just display information about maps and streets in the world and geography and stuff. But separately from that, you can also display the user or the device, its location, like as a little dot or a pin or where they are. That's a separate thing, which we'll talk about as well. The bad thing is that, like most things in Android, they make it a little more complicated than it needs to be, unfortunately. You have to have like a special key code because, the mapping data is valuable data to Google. Like other mapping services try to sort of scrape or steal their data, or people sort of leverage their map data and download a bunch of gigabytes of it, and their app isn't coded very well. So they make you sort of have, we talked about these like API keys. Sometimes when we did like web services or APIs, we had to have keys to use them. So you do have to have a key if you want to use Google Maps. And if you use it too much, it will start to sort of lock you out, or it might want you to pay a couple dollars. But I've never come close to that, so I don't think you will either. But okay, so if you want to do this, I think the best way to get started doing this is to first make sure your emulator will support mapping, because like you can do maps on a real device, but you can also test it on the emulator. But in order for it to work, you have to make sure that your emulator device supports the Google Play services. If you made one for this course, my guess is it probably does, but I went to test my lecture notes for today and my device didn't, and I had to make a new emulator device. So like when you're in Android Studio and you click there's like a Android Virtual Device Manager, and you can see your devices and you can say create new device. And some of them have this Play Store icon, but if you happen to pick one that didn't have that icon, it will not work for testing maps at all. It just doesn't work. So like I was running my app and it just kept saying error, and I Googled about 1 million times until I figured out that was why, so I had to fix that. But I made a new device that does have that logo, Play Store. It's something about it needs to have certain Google libraries installed on the emulator. So now that I have that, I can test on there. Again, if you go up here to the top, there's all these different links, and one of them has like a picture of a phone with an Android standing next to it or something, and that says AVD Manager. Or I think up here under Tools, you can say AVD Manager. So you pop up your list of all your emulators and just double check that. Hopefully you won't have to do anything or make a new device. That's the first thing you need to do if you want to test this thing. If you're installing on a real device through a USB cord, you don't have to do this, I don't think. The next thing, so if you want to actually get started with the coding, I think the following is the easiest way to do this. You tell your app that you want to add a new activity, and you know how when we make a new project, it says like what kind of activity do you want? We always pick empty activity. We sort of pick that as the default. There's all these other ones, and I haven't talked about most of them, but one of the ones in the list is called a Google Maps activity. And I think you should do that, because when you do that, Android Studio then makes a whole bunch of like patches and changes to your project configuration to make it so that your project will be able to connect to Google Apps correctly. Now, you could go and make all of those same changes yourself manually, and I have some slides at the end of my deck of how to do that. But it's kind of a pain in the ass, and I have to admit, it's really hard to make sure you get all the steps perfect. This thing does most of it for you. So you go, I've already done it because I had to get ready for today. So if you say, in your Java part of your app, I'm going to do an app with you guys called City Finder. It's not much of a thing, but It reminds me of some of my senior projects, actually. It's just a map where we're going to pop up some little pins of cities and stuff, and hopefully we'll get credit. So if you're just in your project and you say, new activity, there's these different kinds, and if you it doesn't have the map one in the list here, but if you say gallery, it pops up all the different ones, and you just scroll down and say Google Maps activity. And you don't have to do much here, you just say finish. I'm not going to do it because I don't want another map. I already kind of did this, and I called it map test activity, but do that. Makes a bunch of changes to your project. I don't want to go through in full detail like what all those changes are, but like for example, it edits your manifest and it tells it that your project wants permission to do some stuff. Like it wants to access your location and it wants to use the internet. And like those are things that maps need to be able to do. So it kind of sets up your project, it requests those permissions. It also does some stuff like it sets up some information about a key and stuff. I'll talk about that. And it sets up some information about what version of maps you're using. And if you didn't have that new activity that we just did, you'd have to go type this in yourself. And I mean, it's hard to get this right. I want to talk about this key for a second. So if I had done this wizard here, well, I think I could just do it. Let me see. I mean, I don't really want another activity, but if I say maps activity and I type like, we don't need this activity, finish, it's gonna like grind a lot. And then when it's done, oh, I hope it didn't break it. When it's done doing that, it pops you into this new file that it has created, which is called Google Maps API.xml. And what's nice about this file, it puts that in your project, and this file is like a to-do list of all the stuff you need to do to make this work. So it's like, hey, go to this website. And so if I went there, there'd be this button I would click that said create. I already did it before. And then it would say, once you click that, it would ask you like, hey, what's your key? And it's like, you paste this in there. So basically like Google's servers need to know some stuff about your app because they don't want random strangers connecting and pulling out map data. So I'd have to tell Google, this is me, this is my key or something. And then once I did that, then the app would be able to access map data. So anyway, I have this key here. You know what I mean? It kind of sets all that up. It's kind of nice. So then, once I've done that, now I can use this thing called a map fragment. A map fragment, you might remember from a while ago, when you want a fragment, you say, use a fragment tag. Then you have to write the name of the fragment, which is the class name that it comes from. This is a Google-provided class called map fragment. There's a little more stuff you can put here about parameters like of the map as it loads up, but I'll show you those in a minute. You typically would give it an ID and so forth. And now you've got a map in your activity. So what I've done here in my code, kind of walking in, let me close some of these things. So I've got a map test activity. And what's in here is a map fragment, and I got a few things set on here that we'll talk about, but most of it's layout stuff for constraint layout. And then I've got down here, I've got a spinner of cities and a button that says clear. So I'm gonna play with choosing different cities, and then I want the map to show me those cities or something. It's pretty stupid, but that's all I have. I just have this map fragment, I think if I run this, is it already running? So the app, what I did was I made it so that the starting activity was just this thing that said City Finder, and then you can say begin, and then when you say begin, it jumps to this activity that has the map in it, basically. So it's compiling. City Finder, begin. And now there's a map, cool. Now, I didn't really do anything. I mean, that's just sort of the default view of a Google Map fragment. I can drag it around. I think if this were a real device, you could sort of pinch and squeeze to go in and out. Like, I don't know how you do. I think if you double click, it sort of scrolls in. I don't know how you. I think if you hold like Control, you can there's some sort of way to use a mouse to simulate pinching by holding Control or Alt or something like that. I don't really know how, but I noticed if you double click, it'll sort of zoom in. So you'll notice like it's basically pulling Google Map data, but it doesn't know where we are. We're somewhere over here, right? You know, it doesn't really, it's not showing us or any particular thing, right? So, okay, I got a map, cool. That's a map fragment. Any questions so far? I mean, mostly I'm just sort of, how I found all this is I just Googled, like, how do you add a map to your app? And there's a Google tutorial, and it walks through, and, you know, I'm just sort of following the steps that anybody would follow here, right? So far, so good? Okay, well, so if you want to talk to the map, if you want to write some code that does stuff with the map, what you do is when your activity gets created, you talk to your fragment manager. You guys remember when you did like Friender and some of these apps, you have to use fragment manager for one thing to talk to another fragment or whatever. It's the same stuff here. You can talk to that map fragment that you added, and you can write a function called getMapAsync. And this is basically like when your activity loads up, the map isn't quite ready. It has to go fetch some data before the map is ready. And so if you say getMapAsync and then you put brackets here, you're passing in a Lambda function, and that Lambda function is going to get executed when the map is ready, when the map is on the screen, when it's finished getting the map from the server. And when it's got the map, it'll pass it as a parameter to this Lambda, so you can kind of do what you want to do with it. So over here I think in my activity it's mostly blank. I've got a few variables I haven't done anything with, but so you can do something like so fragment manager dot find fragment by ID. You have to give your fragment an ID. So in the XML here, I called it r.id.map. So I could say r.id.map. And so that fragment is going to be a map fragment. So I could say as map fragment. As is like typecasting in Kotlin. So I could be like val mf equals. And so then I could sort of talk to this thing. I could say, hey, you mf, get the map asynchronously. And so then that's going to be, you know, Google Map there. So when it arrives, when it's ready, it will give the map itself to me using that variable. So it's a little confusing because there's this map fragment data type, but then there's also this thing which is a Google Map data type. That's the actual map that I want. So essentially what I usually want to do here is I want to save the map as a variable so that if I want to talk to the map while this thing is running, I can talk to it. So typically I'll make some sort of variable, you know, called whatever of type Google Map, and then I'll say map equals Google Map. So now I have it. I've got a variable. I can talk to it. Okay. So, you know, we'll do more, but like you can also do things here like move the camera, move to center on Palo Alto or something like that. You could do that sort of stuff here in the code as well, right? Okay. I haven't shown you all the commands you can give yet, though. So here's some more stuff. Here's a list of some of the methods you can do to a Google Map object, and I think you probably want to just look through the documentation a little bit. You can add circles and lines and markers and polygons and sort of, if you imagine you're writing an app for a walking person to walk their route or a biker or driving person or whatever, you might want to like mark points on the map and draw lines between them. So there's like functions for that. You can add markers, you can add lines. Polyline is a line that directs you to the nearest polyamorous conclave in your neighborhood. No, it's a multiple line segment figure or something like that. You can also move and rotate the camera, the position, the zoom, this kind of stuff, right? I think there's methods for like, do you want the satellite imagery or the sort of cartoon drawings of the streets, you know, different style and map, that kind of stuff. There's also a whole bunch of different event listeners. You can listen for clicks, you can listen for people touching different things on the map, like markers or stuff like that. You can look for dragging and swiping on the map. There's a whole bunch of like event stuff that I'm not going to touch very much of today, but it's there, you know. Depends what you're doing with your app, right? So, okay, I mentioned that the map has a camera, and so it's kind of like the perspective the map is using to look at some region of the Earth or its data set or whatever, right? one of the more obvious things the map has is a central point that you're looking at. Am I looking at Castro in Mountain View or San Francisco or whatever, or am I looking at Arizona someplace? So you have a sort of central location that you're looking at, which is thought of as a latitude and longitude, like a GPS coordinate somewhere on the Earth. We can talk about coordinates in a minute. But you also have some sort of zoom level, like how much surrounding information do I see? How many feet or miles or something can I see? That's your zoom level. It's got some sort of numeric scale. I actually haven't played with the zoom today, so I can't remember. It's, the different, I think the zoom being higher means you're zoomed in more, but it sort of goes from like 1 or 2 up to 21. You can have these different, you can zoom all the way out and see the whole planet, or you can zoom way in and see individual buildings and stuff, right? There's also, like, you can rotate. I think a lot of us think like up is north, and so that's a kind of standard bearing, standard orientation, but the user can sort of spin their fingers and change the orientation, and the little compass guide appears, right? You can also tilt a map. I've never wanted to do this, but you can sort of tilt it down so you're almost like 3D viewing the world or something, and I hate that. But more recent versions of the Android phones, they when you type in maps and you want to search, you want directions to drive somewhere, it's like 3D, like you're playing a video game or something. And I hate it because it's like slow and it makes my phone really chunky and stuff. And I wish it would just show an overhead map like that, but whatever. All of those are things that you can adjust about the camera if you want to. If you want to adjust these things, it does help to know a little bit about coordinates. I only know about this much about latitude and longitude, but latitude is sort of your north-south relative to the equator angle, and then longitude is your sort of east-west relative to the sort of prime meridian that slices through England, right? Doesn't it? So Greenwich, isn't it Greenwich it comes from? It's also the time zone slicer, the date line or whatever. So, I mean, I have no instincts about latitude, longitude. If you gave me a latitude and a longitude, I could not tell you what continent or hemisphere it was in. All I can tell you is like every position in these maps has a latitude and a longitude, and that if you want to represent a position, you just have to look up its coordinates somehow. There's lots of websites you can look up to find, if you click on like Seattle, Washington, what are the GPS coordinates? What's the latitude and longitude? You can also just, I believe if you go to Google Maps and you say like, Pizza Chicago, whatever place, and then you say, I'm going to go have food there. I think up here in the address bar, those are the coordinates of it. It's latitude 37.4, longitude negative 122.12. So you can sort of, there's a whole bunch of different ways that if you just need to know the GPS coordinate of a particular place, you can go snatch them from somewhere, right? So there you go. But those are relevant to this domain that we're in right now, right? So if you want to set the camera, the sort of initial camera of the map, you can do that by specifying some parameters as you declare the fragment. You can say camera target, latitude, longitude, et cetera, zoom level, and this kind of stuff, right? Also, as the thing is on the screen, you can adjust the camera. You can set the camera to a new position. Like maybe if you say, I want to look at Portland, Oregon, you can move the camera to be looking at Portland, Oregon. So if you want to do that, there is a class called Camera Update Factory that has a method you can use that takes as a parameter a latitude and longitude and a bounds, like how far out from there do you want to be able to see. So you sort of pass in the latitude and longitude as it's like a little object called a lat-ung, and you pass the latitude and longitude as coordinates there. So kind of what I want to do, a little bit of what I want to do in this app is I want to have this list of cities that's down at the bottom, down here, and if you tap on one of them, I want to move the camera to look at that city. It's not very hard. Where do I get this information from? Well, I've got some data file. I just made a data file, so I made a file called cities.txt, and what I did was I stored name of a city followed by latitude, followed by longitude, and there's just these triples are in this file, okay? So in this activity that we're going to write, I was thinking we would have some sort of read cities function where it'll read a scanner and it'll read the name of a city, it'll read the latitude of the city, and it'll read the longitude of the city. Then it's like, okay, what do I do with all these guys, right? So you probably want to save all that in some kind of structure somewhere. If each city has a name and a latitude and a longitude, to me that sounds like a little bitty object that you want to store those things in. So you'd make some kind of city class that stores a name and a latitude and a longitude, something like that, right? So if you wanted to keep all those as a list, you'd say something like, val city equals city name, latitude, longitude. And then maybe you'd store all these guys in a list, right? So up here somewhere, I'll keep like a list of cities, array list of cities, right? And I will do cities.add city. And then presumably I would use the array of cities to set the adapter for this this spinner down here, right? But I think what I did just to get things moving was like I made a string array that also had the same cities in it. So the spinner kind of already has the right list of cities in it, but whatever. So, I got some sort of set of cities, and I want to make it so that when you click on a city, it will move the map to look at that place, right? So how you would do that is in this code for this activity here, this spinner, you just have an event listener, right? So up here, when they select an item, it'll tell me what index they clicked on, and so they selected a city. This isn't really Google Maps stuff yet, but okay, so if they select a city at a given index, I'd say something like, val city equals cities index, right? So now how do I move it so that it'll look at that city? Like how do I show that city on the screen?
You've got to get the latitude and longitude from the city and then put it into the map, your lat longe.
Sure, okay, that city object has the name, the latitude, the longitude. I need to tell the map, move to that latitude and that longitude. So this slide here says you need to make a lat-lung bounds object that contains, the latitude and longitude of interest here. You can also, instead of a bounds, you could just pass a specific point. I think that's like your central point. Bounds would be like this rectangle. I want that area of the world to be visible. Or if you say just new latitude, longitude, it's like that's the central point I want to move to. So I think you'd say like camera update factory dot move. Is it called move camera? What is it called? Move. Sorry. I should say new lat-lung. New lat-lung, and I'll pass lat-lung that takes city dot lat city dot lung. Okay, so that's a camera update latitude longitude thingy, and so I have to say map dot move camera to that. So map is my global variable, my private field. Move camera to there. Okay, so you pick a city, I'll move the camera there. Let's give it a try. I'm not going to code every random function that you can do here. I'm just trying to show you like what does an app look like that does some stuff with a map, right? So, uh-oh. Did it just crash? Dude. Null cannot be cast as map fragment. Map activity 41. So it's mad because I tried to get r.id.map. It's right there. Let me call it the Google map. I don't know if I've got some bad name there. And then here, this should be r.id.the Google map. Let me try that again. Maybe I had some other variable called map or something. Have you ever encountered this where like more than one activity has the same ID? You have to be kind of careful about stuff like that. I think I might have some problem like that going on. So let's try again. Uh-oh. No. Let's see. It's still null. It doesn't like that. There's also something called fragment support manager. or support fragment manager. I wonder if I have to talk to him. Let me try him real quick. If that's the case, I might have to update my slide, but I didn't think I needed to do that. Let's try again. Okay, begin. Uh-oh. Geez, what's wrong? What have I done wrong? Oh, wait, it says support map fragment cannot be cast to map fragment. Okay, so I think, one thing I encountered with some of these tutorials is like they have sort of a version of this called map fragment, and then they have another version called support map fragment, which is meant to be more compatible with old devices. And you see this sometimes when you say things like app compat activity rather than activity. So I don't know which version of this you should use or which one's better, but I think they want me to call this a support map fragment. I think that would probably fix this thing. I'll update the slide. Maybe that's what they want me to say. Sometimes they make you say fragment, sometimes they make you say support map fragment. Let's try one more time. Oh, no, please don't do this to me. Oh, what's happening? Well, this is a different error, right? Aren't we always excited when our crash turns into some other kind of crash, right? Now I'm getting an error that says index out of bounds 0 when I do array list get on city selected. So it didn't like that. So I think what's maybe happening is that when the thing first pops up, it thinks of it as though it's selecting a city. So I think what kind of happens is I need to get the thing to load up without it like selecting anybody. So I think I could do something like if the index is greater than or equals 0 and it's less than cities.size. I think it hasn't read the cities yet from the file, you know. In fact, we have that function we wrote called read cities, and I don't know if we ever called it. So let's call that too. So when the thing gets loaded, I'll say read cities, and then I'll also load the map. Okay, I think we're making progress here. Crashes always scare me because these demos are kind of, you know, I always walk in here like praying and hoping I won't just get stuck, right? Because I don't want you guys to think I'm an idiot. Okay, so here goes. Oh, I got cities. Okay, so now wait, if I choose like Portland, Oregon. Wait, that's not Portland, Oregon. Why did it move there? It moved though. You saw. Okay, I think what's it's a comedy of errors, but I think what's happening here is that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago that I have this list of cities, right? I also mentioned that I went ahead and just stuck them in this string file as well, right? But I think they're in different orders in the two places. I think here I alphabetize them, like Albuquerque is first, but over here Denver is first. And so I think the problem is that it's using these indexes and then it's going to the cities from here, kind of, you know? So I think I need to put these elements of this into the same order. Or maybe what I need to do is over here when I load this thing, I need to say when I'm reading the cities, I'm going to actually make a list called val city names is an array list of strings with nothing in it. And here when I'm adding cities, I'm going to say city names dot add name. And then here I'm going to make this city spinner use an adapter that reads from those city names. So I think after I do that, the cities in the spinner are going to be in the right order and stuff, you know. So let's try that again. I don't think that's any sort of map bug. That's just a my code is bad bug. So now look, I've got Denver first. So I think now if I say Seattle, Washington, hey, I'm pretty sure it's centered on Seattle, Washington. Let's zoom it in a little more. It didn't change the zoom, right? If I choose Tucson, Arizona, that's where I grew up. There it is, right? You choose Boston, Mass, it jumps over there, right? You could also make it so that when you click on these guys, it'll also zoom in, zoom out, whatever. You could tell it that when you're moving your camera, when you're setting your camera. There's another method. We just had this thing that said move camera. Where is it? Move camera here. There's also a method called map.animate camera. And I think you can pass this same thing. I don't know if you have to pass any other parameters. You might pass You can pass some sort of other, parameters to that. But if you just say animate camera instead of move, I'm pretty sure it'll do sort of a swoosh instead of just jumping to the new place. So that might be kind of nicer for the user. Let's give that a try. To begin, let's zoom in a little bit, double click, double click, double click, and then let's try Portland, Oregon. Swoosh. Do you see that? It moves, so it animated. Okay, so you can do stuff with these different cities. Let me show you one or two other things in a little bit. We'll sort of stop, but I'm just kind of giving you a starting point here. You can also put these little pins, these little red pins. They call them markers. So you can talk to your map object. And you can say add marker. A marker is built by creating a marker options object, which then has a bunch of setters where you say set the position to this latitude, longitude, set its name or title, set this, set that. And so, what I could do in the code, as you choose a city, I could also put a marker on that city as well. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do with markers. You can make it so that when you click on them, it'll call a function with a lambda. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. But like just as a quickie here, I'll say, well, you just clicked on this city, so I'll put a marker there. I'll say map.add marker from a marker options object. I'll say like dot position, let's use the city dot latitude and longitude or whatever. Lat longe, that comes from city.lat, city.lunge. And then you could do something like dot title from the city.name. You make the marker have that title. So I think that's all I need to say, right? Map.add marker? Yeah, let's do it. And of course you can say remove and clear. You can get rid of the markers if you need to. So let me show that real quick. Like if I jump to Portland, Oregon, it'll make a little marker on Portland, Oregon. So let's go to Miami. There it is. So if I tap on it, it says Miami, Florida. So that's my little marker that I made, okay? Other things, you can make lines, you can make paths. I'm not going to demo all these things because I think once you've seen one or two of these features, I think you sort of get the idea. If you have 2 points or 2 markers or whatever, you say I want to add a line or a polyline between those 2 places. So that would be for like sketching out a route or a path or something like that, right? Once you've added this thing, if you want to get rid of it later, you should save the thing that you added. When you say map.add polyline, it sort of returns that as a variable. So you could save it, you could put it in an array list of all the lines, and then you could remove them all. You could tell them all to remove themselves. So I want to talk briefly about how the user's location factors into this, and then we'll sort of stop. All those cities that I just showed you were just sort of fixed coordinates because I looked up the GPS coordinates of a bunch of major US cities, right? But might want to know where the phone is located, where we are located. So, I mean, there's a little bit of background on this slide about what the GPS system is, but I think the simple version is like your phone has sensors in it that it can use to ask, where am I? What is my latitude and longitude, right? The phone actually has several different ways of trying to figure that out. And it's a little bit complicated, but I mean, it actually has literally a global positioning system sensor that it can contact, which talks to satellites and stuff. It also has a lot of other clever things it can do. Like it can reach out using the Wi-Fi and just search for like what Wi-Fi routers are nearby. And Google knows a lot of stuff about Wi-Fi routers and where they are located, what their coordinates are. Or it can even ask the router, do you know what your GPS coordinates are? There's a lot of stuff like that where it has a lot of ways that it can sort of deduce where you are located. Or like if it knows that I know where your phone is and I'm on the same Wi-Fi hub as you, so I must be pretty close to you. Like it has a lot of really complicated logic like that where it'll say, just try your best to figure out where I am. So if you want to know where the phone is, wouldn't you think it would just be like get location or something? But you have to ask for a location manager service, and then you have to ask for your last known location because it updates over time. It might know your location from 10 seconds ago or 0 seconds ago or 5 minutes ago. So you're always asking, when's the last position you knew that I was at? But you can ask these different services. You can ask your GPS for your last known location. If the GPS isn't working or it's not able to reach the GPS information for some reason, it'll return null. So then you can ask for things like, does AT&T know where I'm located? There's also a thing called the passive provider, which is kind of that Wi-Fi stuff where it asks nearby devices if they know where you're located. So you can sort of do this sequence of try this, try this, try this, and see if you ever find something that's not null. And then if you find something that's not null, you will now have an object that has a latitude and a longitude inside of it, so you're good. What I do is I wrap this into some kind of function called getMyLocation that returns the loc object out, and I just, if that's not null, I use it basically. But that's the sort of the logic that you have to write if you want to know where you are.
What all permissions will you require for this? Like, you have to put something in Gradle and all that?
Right. So the unfortunate thing is there's even more BS than just this. Like, this is the code you have to write, but the location of the device is actually a very sensitive piece of information, right? If I can trick you into installing my app, and then I write a piece of code in a loop that asks where you are and sends it to me, I'm totally able to stalk you and follow you around and invade your privacy, right? So apps have to ask for permission to do this. Now, the old way of asking for permissions in Android was that you edited the manifest description of the project and you declared what permissions that you wanted. I want to access your network, I want to access your location, I want to write files to your storage. You declared those permissions there, and then the user, when they installed your app, it would pop up and say, hey, this app wants to look at your location. Is that okay, right? You see that list of things the app wants to do, and you go, okay, install the app, no problem, right? And you still have to do this. But what they decided was users didn't really read that. So everybody was saying, okay, and they would install the app, and it was like, now the app had all this permission, and people were kind of getting tricked, right? So they added another layer of safety, where in addition to this, the app also has to write some Kotlin code. I think you were asking about this. The app has to have some Kotlin code that asks the user, can I please use your location right now? So if you just write this code that was on this slide, it will actually crash with an exception, and it'll say the user doesn't give you any permission to do that. So if you want to do that, what you have to do first is, I said you have to do that as well, but that's not enough. The new thing is you have to write a piece of code that calls this method named check self permission, and you have to pass some kind of constant for what permission you're checking about. I wrote permission name, but you'd put access course location, access find location, whatever. You call this method to check if you have that permission. If you have it, go ahead, you can do whatever you need to do. If you don't have it, you can call this method named request permission, and you pass the permission or permissions you want to request as an array, and then it'll pop up this little box that says, hey, do you want to deny or allow? And then it'll be very specific. Do you want to allow the location? And I think the designers of Android decided this is better because at the moment you're installing the app, you don't have a lot of context for why it wants the permission, but if it pops it up right as you're about to look at the map or whatever, it makes it sort of more clear, oh, they want my permission for this specific feature. And so then you might be more inclined to say, wait, I don't want to allow that or something. So yeah, to answer your question, basically in order to put the user's location into this app, I would have to copy this code and paste it in, and I would have to surround this code with an if-else block that looked more like this. So I find this all really horrid, but this is what they do. So usually I sort of grab this code and I mush it into my project somehow, and I would do something like, I already have something down at the bottom, ask permission for location. This is that code from the slide I just talked about. Check permission. If it's granted, okay. If I don't have it, request permission. So I turned it into a method that returned a Boolean if you have the permission or not. And then if I want the location here, I basically say, if I have permission, do this, else don't do this, and then the code will work properly. So because there's so much muck to all that, and I want to end on time, I'm not going to incorporate that into the City Finder app that I'm showing you today, but essentially there would be some pasting of things like this to accomplish that. Okay, what else? One thing that's tricky though, so imagine you want to do this. You want to write the app to sort of follow the user around. Maybe it draws a line of where they're walking or driving or something, right? Great, fine, but how do you test that? Because you're running an emulator. The emulator either doesn't have a location or it's located right there, and it's I can't take my laptop around and walk around with it, and you know what I mean? That just doesn't seem like that's going to work. So that's always a source of difficulty for people writing location-aware apps. And so what you can do, when your emulator is running, you can connect to the emulator using a terminal, and once you're connected to the emulator, you can type commands that will tell the emulator to pretend that its location is at a certain latitude and longitude. There's this command you type in called geofix that if you type geofix and then you put some coordinates, it will make the emulator pretend that it's located there. And so then if you wanted to move it over time, you'd wait a second and then give it a new geofix and it would move it to a new place or something like that. Again, I'm not going to demo that live today, but that's kind of how you do it. Or, hey, if you've never done it, like get a USB cord, plug it in, install it on a real device, and walk around, and then you'll get actual data, right? You can do that too. A couple other things. I mean, that's most of what I wanted to say. Like, what you might want to do is you might want to watch the user's location, and then you might want your app to be sort of notified if they move by more than 50 feet or something. And if that was what you wanted, you could use something called a location listener, which, of course, because it's Android, requires a page of hideous-looking code. But you can attach to your location manager service a location listener that will notify you when the user's location has changed. And you'll get a new location object with a new latitude and a new longitude. You can specify some sort of minimum time and distance. Tell me every 10 minutes or tell me every 50 feet or something like that. And then it will send your event, your code an event when the user has moved, basically. So that would be something your app could respond to. So that's as simple as that, right? Anyway, I said at the start, I think I don't like that. It sort of feels hard to do basic stuff here. I think if I were going to really write an app that did a lot of mapping and location stuff, I would write a lot of helper code that sort of wrapped a lot of this up for me, so I didn't have to think about it in this icky level of abstraction. I would potentially incorporate it into a library or something like that, but that's just my opinion. Anyway, I guess if you think this is fun and you want to play with this, you could potentially incorporate it into like Tree Chat as an extension or something. Like maybe the chat rooms are per city or per location or something like that. But other than that, it's more just for your curiosity. Any questions about? I mean, that's basically it. The rest of the slides are just like if you had to add mapping to your project manually, how would you do so? Any like questions about maps and location and any of that kind of stuff? Have I both informed and horrified you to where you never want to use this in an app now anymore? Are you going to pick something else as your senior project? If I accomplish nothing else, have I at least accomplished that? All right, well, we'll end there. I'll put this code up on the web, and I hope I'll see you Thursday for React Native. Thanks, see you then. Don't forget section.